Hey there, welcome to Extra Healthy-ish. This is the big sister grown-up podcast to the one called Healthy-ish. Both podcasts from Body+Soul. Well, we've designed them to give you that little bit extra in your day for your mind, body, and yes, you guessed it, soul. I am Felicity Harley. My guest today is best-selling author, blogger, and self-confessed gentle activist Alexx Stuart, who is all about living a low-tox life. Yes, optimizing your health, your household's health, while also looking after the health of the planet. She's diving right into what this lifestyle is all about, and she shares her simple tips on how to shop better, eat better, and live better for a healthier you and a healthier planet. She has a new book out, FYI. It's called Low Tox Life Food. Alexx, thank you so much for coming on Extra Healthy-ish. Now, first up, one question. How do you stay extra healthy-ish in your daily life?
So one of my favourite ways is to make sure I've got lots of healthy food in the house. And by healthy, I mean produce, fresh, beautiful, seasonal produce. Because if it's not there and instead you have your chips and your chocolates and all those sorts of things,
you don't eat it.
The human brain goes straight to the fastest, most lucrative energy source they can find, quick wins, and I am no saint. I can't rise above that myself. So one of the easiest ways is to just make sure I'm well stocked with the good stuff.
I like that. Easy tip. And easy to do. If it's there in front of you in the fruit bowl, you'll eat it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Literally just had an apple before we recorded.
Nice. Now, living a low tox life, this is kind of your bag. This is your thing. Before we go into living a low tox life via food, can you just quickly sum up? I know we refer to this in Healthy-ish if anyone's listening and has listened to that, but what is living a low tox life exactly?
So I'll give a slightly different answer so
everyone's
like still excited.
You.
When I created Low Tox Life as an education platform, I really wanted to make sure that people didn't feel like they had to quit everything and be saints and have this black and white world where you were either perfect or you were failing. It really is this beautiful murky grey area where we're all just moving forward as best we can to do better by ourselves and better by the planet. And I came up with 4 pillars of food, body, home, and mind, so that we understood the importance of everything being interconnected and linked, because I've seen a ton of people try to go 100% organic or, ditch every single environmental toxin from their personal care and cleaning products and end up stressed out of their mind with anxiety. So you really have to tick the mind box, the food, the body and the home, and just kind of ease your way through. As you get comfy with some of the changes you've made, you then have a look at what might be next. And that's really what it's about, and creating that community of like-minded people who want to move through in that more relaxed way rather than the old way. Like if I think of, when we all used to watch Oprah and start the new fad diet in the 90s.
Oh, yes.
And you would do it like so perfectly and rigid, like military precision. But then, of course, nothing is sustainable when you live like that, and you don't feel motivated because you fail so quickly into the piece.
Yeah.
So I'm much more about a whole bunch of imperfect souls doing our best by people and planet.
Yep. 100%. I'm in for that. I'm in. So, okay.
Nice.
I'm in. We're in. We're all in. Listeners, we're in.
I love it.
Now, how do we go? Completely changing the way we shop, prepare and eat. That can be overwhelming. So where can we start if we want to get on this bandwagon with you?
Yeah, look, I find having been someone who had to radically overhaul my food 17 years ago when we were trialing a gluten-free diet way before it was cool, right? But a gluten-free diet because I was having constant tonsillitis, and there was a little bit of research that had a link between going gluten-free and alleviating this non-celiac gluten sensitivity relationship
That's
with
intriguing.
tonsillitis. At that point, because the antibiotics had stopped working, I was willing to try anything. And even though I'm half French and I love my croissant and my quiche and all those good things, I was like, if this works, it's worth it, because I literally can't be healed by antibiotics anymore. So I need something different. And so I had to look at all those labels and I had to study all those ingredients to try and find the hidden gluten, which was unfortunately in everything back then. These days, there seems to be tons of packaged food that's gluten-free. And so retrospectively, I see it as a real gift that everything had gluten in it back then, because I was forced to leave the land of packaged foods and actually start to try and figure out produce and how to cook well. As a late 20-something. And I was not good at that prior. I was very convenience-driven and very packaged food reliant. So I have actually done this. And that is why I feel a huge amount of compassion for anyone who wants to put up their hands and make a change, because it's tricky and it can be confronting. And things that you've relied on that have just been easy in your head in the past, all of a sudden you have to rethink and you have to learn something different and find a new solution. And while that can be challenging, it's also, to me, some of the most rewarding work you can do, because once you fully connect with where your food comes from and you stop relying on the ultra-processed foods, and then you start being a bit more savvy and cutting your waste, you feel plugged into something much bigger than yourself. You know, I talked about people and planet and that low tox life ethos. It really is. I'm not just doing this for selfish gains, but I'm now plugged into something where I'm a part of a collective movement of people that recognize we've got to make changes. Like if you look at our health stats, if you look at food waste stats, it's not pretty, right? And if you look at farming stats, you know, you hear the scary, we've only got 60 years of topsoil left.
Yes.
Like it's really hard to be a busy modern human and go, you know what, I'm rolling my sleeves up and I'm getting in there, because that all of that's really sounds really big and confronting. But the good news is on a day-to-day level, it's just basically implementing a whole bunch of clever little tips and tricks that help you ease into a new way of doing things. And that's really what the new book, Low Tox Life Food, is helping people realize. Those awesome overlaps that we all have, no matter how we eat, are three things, and that is eliminating food waste, really removing as much ultra-processed food reliance as you can from your day-to-day life. And then the third is really just starting to get to know where your food comes from, how it's grown, and whether it's a extractive method of farming or a regenerative method of farming, which we're going to hear regenerative more and more, because that's basically, it gives more back to the planet than it takes in terms of getting the food for the people. And it's super exciting how many farmers are making transitions and how much education is happening. So it can feel daunting when you don't know anything yet and you're just dipping your toe in. But my advice there is to really have a think about which aspect you're most interested in and start there. So if
great tip.
Ditching food waste is your like, ooh, that sound, I'd love to do that. It's been frustrating me for a while. Forget the regenerative farmer piece for now. Forget the ultra-processed food for now. Focus on your food waste because you're already motivated. You know what I mean? And I think we often think we have to just do everything perfectly, and then we wonder why we fail 5 days in.
We'll be back after this short break with more from Alexx. Let's talk about reducing food waste. Can you give us some easy tips?
Yes, I can. So tip number one is to actually know how bad the situation is, because I'm a big fan of a big, scary statistic that just kicks our butts into gear.
Do you have one there on hand?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so hit us with it.
If food waste was a country, it would be the third largest emitter behind the United States and China. And to put it into perspective, if we were able to eradicate food waste in terms of how many cars that would take off the road, it would be the equivalent of 500 million cars off the road.
What?
And to give you even more context, because we often tend to be like, oh my gosh, I've got to stop flying. And yeah, sure, we've got to stop flying from Sydney to Melbourne to have one meeting. I completely get that. But if you eradicated flying, like airline travel, it would be the equivalent of taking 37 million cars off the road. So 500 million cars, 1 billion with food waste, 37 million with airplane travel.
Wow.
So this is a massive fish to fry, pardon the pun. And it's a really great place for us to all think, oh, wow, this is where I can make a huge difference.
So what are some tips? You've got some great ones in the book. What are some things we can do in the kitchen tonight to reduce our food waste?
So let's think about every time we're chopping our onions, our carrots, our celery, those sorts of things. spring onions, herbs, or like herbs are wilting a bit in the fridge and you're starting to ignore them because you're not inspired to cook with them anymore, and then eventually they get thrown away. Put all of those offcuts and slightly wilted herbs, put them all into a compostable bag, into the freezer. And every time you cut some more offcuts, so some more onion skin or the outer layer or the end of a carrot or the last bits of a parsley bunch, keep putting it in that bag until it's full. Also put in any chicken bones from a leftover roast chook, or beef bones, or chops if you do lamb chops, those sorts of things where you've got bones. Put all those used bones into that same bag. End of the month, chuck it all in a pot, cover it with water, cook it up for an hour or two, and you have the most delicious stock, completely free. I mean, a bag of stock in the organic shop that I shop at is like $12 for half a litre, but I'm able to make 2 litres with the stuff that I would be throwing away otherwise in my kitchen. And that's a huge way to cut your waste. My second tip, and to finish that, you've then got that stock to make really tasty stews, soups. Bolognese tastes way better than just adding plain water.
Yeah.
So chuck it all in jars, freeze a couple, keep a couple in the fridge for the week.
Give some to your neighbours.
Using them.
Yeah,
give some to your neighbours.
Yeah.
I love that community suggestion. That is such a great point. Start connecting. I've got too much of this. What have you got? Let's do a swap. That's beautiful.
Now, they were good tips, by the way. What about, now, one other question I want to ask you before we go is how do we ensure we're not doing more harm than good when we get sucked into trends? I mean, things like avocados, quinoas, like all of these asahi. I'm trying to think of other things that you read about that are harming the country from where it comes from. How do we navigate this?
So my number one tip here is eat local, because if you are eating hyper locally, as much as possible, like 80-20, I think is the rule for everything in life. It just tends to create flexibility around the mental health piece of change. But if you can make most of what you eat hyper local, like plug into a CSA box or a local farm box delivery to you, we have some great resources on lowtoxlife.com for that. Then what you're avoiding is hot new nutritionist says this is good for us. Everyone starts buying it, and then you find out that the healthy fats from avocados coming from Mexico half of the year are actually responsible for deforestation and really poor, practically slavery working conditions for Mexicans. And you think, oh my gosh. And there I was thinking I was eating a healthy fat that was good for my clean eating plan. And this is where the risk is in starting to follow people with lots of followers online when they make something or they endorse something. You just have to be really careful. And I think eating hyper local is really important, because you mentioned quinoa there. So quinoa caused a massive food shortage in Bolivia when it was first trended, because everyone started buying it up. And then all of a sudden, the local food source evaporated because the export market needed it all. And, some wealthy people in that country thought, I'm going to capitalize on this trend and create syndicates and then sell it on behalf of all these growers and then rip the growers off. All that sort of stuff happens. So the more we can eat locally, the better we can avoid these kind of trends and causing issues with cultures that we, of course, would normally have absolutely no desire to hurt or harm in any way. That's one of the best things we can do.
I like that, Alexx. Alexx, thank you so much for sharing your tips on Extra Healthy-ish.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, there you go. Some great tips on Alexx about how you can live a low-tox life, and that includes chucking everything in the freezer and boiling it all up to make some delicious stock. I love that idea. What a genius idea. If you want more genius ideas, make sure you grab Alexx's new book. It's called Low Tox Life Food. If you want more from us, Extra Healthy-ish, we publish a new episode of this podcast every morning, Monday to Thursday. For more info, head to bodyandsoul.com.au or Follow us on Instagram or Facebook. Give us some ideas for an upcoming episode or any feedback. We're open to all ideas. Thanks again for listening. And if you have a moment, we'd be so grateful if you could rate, review and subscribe to this podcast. And until tomorrow, stay extra healthy-ish.